Welcome to A Little Bit Radical, a business podcast from Standing on Giants. I'm Rob, your host. Join me as I meet people and organisations who are doing things differently, challenging the status quo and, yes, might just be a little bit radical.
Food waste. When I say that, what comes to mind? Perhaps the overflowing bins of perfectly good food outside your local supermarket. Perhaps those couple of carrots that you probably could have done something with but threw away instead. Whichever end of the scale, this is an issue that is now impossible to ignore. Some studies put the amount of food wasted as high as 2.5 billion tonnes every single year. That's 5.8 trillion meals. One business fighting the war on waste is Olio, a free-to-use app that connects neighbours with each other and local businesses so that surplus food can be shared. I'm thrilled today to be joined by Anne-Charlotte Mornington, who is Head of Impact at Olio, who is here to tell me all about this little bit radical business. And Charlotte, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Rob. It's my great pleasure to be here. I love the opportunity to talk a little bit more about what we do and why we do it.
Fantastic. So, Anne-Charlotte, if you are a little bit radical, and you're on this podcast, so we know you are, what do you think in your early life set you up for that?
I, from very early age, remember that I wanted to somehow participate to building a better outcome, or in a very abstract sense, make the world better. And I probably was going to sound like a massively egotistical person, but I remember listening to my history classes in primary school, like really early history, and thinking, wow, it's so cool that some people are remembered for what they've done and for how they've shaped the world. Wouldn't it be amazing to be remembered for having made the world better somehow? I don't know that I'm going to be remembered as in my name, but somehow it's given me this sense of duty or this sense of responsibility that I should try to make a difference and try to be remembered for having done that.
That's really interesting. One of my favourite mantras personally is, some people do it, so why can't I? Did you feel that kind of thing when you were hearing about these historical figures?
No, no, not really. No, I don't think it was a matter of like, well, if they've done it, I can do it. It was more of a matter of like, oh, if anything, like this sounds really exceptional. What could be done to be as exceptional than this? And there was also a sense of like, some people are remembered for having done not great things.
As an adult, have you become more or less radical, would you say? And what's been behind that?
I think I have always had very strong convictions, and I'm quite a determined person. And the way that took shape when I was younger was I would deploy all my energy towards whatever the object of my focus would be at the time. And I don't know that the intensity with which I deploy my energy has changed. I think it's still quite strong and hasn't changed that much actually. But the way I do it and the subject matter towards which I do it has definitely changed. So I don't know that I've grown more radical or less. I think I'm more of a mature radical than a candid or young radical. I think I'm starting to understand what is my place and what are the tools I have at hand and what is the change that I'm able to do. And perhaps the things that I choose to dedicate my time towards are increasingly informed by my experience. But the level of determination and ambition, I think, is quite similar to the one I've had earlier on in my career.
That's interesting. So you've almost developed, what I'm picking up there, a kind of a pragmatism to your radical nature, being able to kind of identify the steps towards what you want to achieve. Is that fair?
Yes, but also understanding your strength. I think there's so much time spent towards learning new skills or trying to become better at certain things. And while I think it's super important to invest in yourself and invest in expanding yourself and your capabilities in many ways, I think it's also really important to play on your strengths, because we all have some wonderful, outstanding strengths that can take us much further. And if we choose to invest and get even better at something we're already really good at, And so I think it's a fine balance between those two things. And early on in my career, I certainly was exploring lots of things and not completely or certainly less aware of what I was exceptionally good at. And as I grow more aware of it, I can understand better where I'm likely to have a better impact.
What are you exceptionally good at?
It's a good question. I think I'm very good at connecting people. I'm very, very good at networking, and I'm very good at bringing people together and creating connections between individuals, which is great because I work for a community-based app.
Well, absolutely perfect segue. So let's move on to your little bit radical work and Olio. For the benefit of anyone who doesn't know about Olio, can you give us a summary of what Olio is and how you would use Olio?
Olio is an app that anyone can download for free on their phones and use it on their desktop as well. And the app connects you with your local community so that if ever you have any excess, whether it's food and non-food actually, things that you're not going to eat or use, anything that might get wasted, whether it's literally going to the trash or just being hoarded in your home and being unused or underused, you can choose to give it away. And so it's very simple to use the app. What you do is you just take a picture of what it is you want to give away and submit it on the app. And this way, anyone near you will receive a notification and can request it from you. And for example, Rob, if you wanted 3 bananas of mine that are getting a bit dark, you would just send me a message. I'd respond, tell you to come pick it up, I don't know, at like 1 p.m. today. And you'd come over, I'd give you the bananas, and that's it. So it's a really, really simple tool that enables connecting local communities. We're 7 years old, and we have over 6.5 million users all over the world who have successfully exchanged items in 62 countries. And a total of 75 million portions of food have been shared on the app successfully so far. We're super proud of our impact. And while the app is a tech product, I think a lot of the magic really happens on people's doorsteps, because this is where community is created, this is where support networks have created, and where a lot of being human happens.
That's really interesting. Thank you for the great summary of Olio. And what a fantastic stat, the number of meals that have been shared on the app, biting away at that 5.8 trillion meals wasted every year. That's fantastic. I'd love to dig into what you were just talking about, that community interaction. Can you share some stories that you've heard from your members, your users, of interactions that have happened that are particularly meaningful?
Of course, we have thousands. We have so many amazing stories that we created a Twitter handle called Olio Stories, where people submit their stories so that we can keep track of all the amazing encounters that we've seen. We've had stories of people becoming best friends and becoming like bridesmaids at each other's weddings. We've had stories of people getting out of homelessness through the network that they met through the app. One lady who was exercising the deathbed wish of her father of helping the community and giving back. And she felt like she was doing that through working with Olio, well, volunteering for Olio rather. We have, unfortunately, countless amounts of people who are food insecure and who tell us how much of a lifesaver it is for them to be able to supplement their diet with Olio food. There's a lot of very moving stories on the community, and certainly if ever myself or any team member at Olio somehow just doesn't feel like it one day or just doesn't feel very excited by their work, reading those amazing testimonials and those amazing connections that people are making that are really helping their life take a better outlook is so heartwarming, and it's so motivating. There's no way you wouldn't want to work really hard on this.
Incredible impact. And I'd like to stick on the word impact because you are head of impact at Olio. What does the head of impact do? Paint the picture for us.
Well, the head of impact, I think in many companies, head of impact is a lot to do with trying to be more sustainable and do less carbon emissions. But the thing about Olio is that we started the company, and I'm a founding team member, so I've seen it from the very beginning. We started the company with values of sustainability at heart. Really, everything Olio does is to encourage people to be more sustainable in the way they live their lives. And so the company is really built on those values. And in that sense, there's actually very little that we can do. There's no huge thing that we're doing completely wrong, rather. There are small things, and I'm not particularly focused on them. There's small tweaks that are being made, but that's not at all the bulk of my work. The bulk of my work is trying to understand how Olio can do more with its impact. And so two of the projects that I'm currently working on, which I'm extremely excited about. The first one is registering Olio as a carbon project. Because while the carbon market has been something that was very much focused on a lot of energy-based projects and nature-based solutions, we at Olio are really proposing a behavior change solution, which is helping communities become more sustainable with their consumption. And when they do that, they put a lot less things towards landfill and towards other food loss and waste destination, which creates less methane. And as a result of it, cumulatively, we can start producing carbon credits. And so this is something I'm really excited about, because creating a methodology that endorses this can help Olio, but it can also help a lot of food banks, a lot of soup kitchens, a lot of mechanisms that help redistribute food waste that perhaps traditionally will struggle with getting funding, can or will very soon be able to get funding via carbon credits. And I think that's really exciting, and I sincerely hope that this new revenue opportunity will attract a lot of very ambitious entrepreneurs towards extending the life cycle of food and redistributing it so that it stays in the human supply chain and that a lot less food will be thrown away. So that's amazing. The other way that I'm trying to do more with Olio's impact is with a collaboration that we're doing with Gauss & St. Thomas and Damsel, which is a company of data scientists who have started developing, in collaboration with Olio, a piece of AI and machine learning that allows the prediction of food insecurity at a general population level. And so we're building this tool, mixing some of Olio's data with a lot of other data sources to identify where food insecurity is happening and show it so that services in the public sector and the third sector can really tackle and support communities that need it most. Because at the moment, there's actually very, very little data, certainly isn't any behavioral data that supports or indicates the presence of food insecurity at a geographic level. So I'm very excited about the support that we've been giving to this project and the potential to help vulnerable communities in doing so.
Wow. Sounds like you must be very busy with two especially large projects. I'd love to dig into both of them actually a little bit more. So the first one, you mentioned carbon credits. For the benefits of our listeners who might not be aware of what that is, and this is certainly, I'd say, fits the bill of a little bit radical idea and a little bit radical change for society. What is a carbon credit and what could that look like in the future? How could it impact our lives?
A carbon credit is a tool that can help change the amount of carbon that is either created or that is already in the atmosphere. And it's normal to have carbon in the atmosphere, but what is referred to in the idea of global warming is an excess amount of carbon in the atmosphere. So much excess that it changes the weather, it changes the temperature, and it stops, because this little particle, which is the carbon, stops light and temperatures and heat from moving as it has so far. And the idea of a carbon credit is a project that dedicates its activity towards, again, either producing less carbon or capturing the carbon that's already in there. And this behavior can be monetized so that if a company, like a renewable energy company, for example, while the output of their work is a really positive thing, they're helping produce better energy, they still have to have offices. They still have to use energy themselves. They still have to buy electronics. And all this creates carbon just from them operating. So while they're doing things well, to do them even better, they can offset the impact of creating their work by buying carbon credits. And one carbon credit is equal to 1 ton of carbon taken out or avoided in the atmosphere. That's a long-winded explanation. I hope that was clear. But basically, it's a financial tool that supports a better environment and the creation of a better atmosphere.
I think you explained it really well. So are we going to see a future where all businesses are going to trade carbon credits?
Trade, I don't know. But certainly, I do believe, whether it's in the US with the SEC talking about getting all listed companies to declare the climate risk, or whether it's in the UK with the Good Company Act, where companies are going to have to publish a net zero plan by the end of 2023. I think that there's a huge movement within the voluntary carbon market for at least listed companies to start being much more clear and much more intentional about doing their work sustainably. And what that means is that they have to start measuring how much carbon they emit and how carbon heavy is every aspect of their work. And when they do that and they start publishing it, then they become responsible for it. So they have to start offsetting what they do or do it better. And similarly, within the procurement area, it will cost them and their carbon emission to work with people who are super carbon intensive. So they are likely to change their procurement criteria towards working with partners who are also much more intentional about being sustainable in their operations. And I think that has the power of a lot of trickle-down effects and a lot of change for companies to be more mindful and start offsetting what really can't be changed in their operations.
Absolutely. So ultimately, as well as an environmental and social imperative, which sometimes companies struggle to prioritize, now a financial imperative coming into play. Is that how we could summarize that?
I think the legal framework in which companies are operating is going to increasingly move towards demanding sustainable credentials and sustainable strategies. And that will force companies towards acting in a much more sustainable way.
Brilliant. And we are obviously, both our companies are part of the B Corp movement, proudly. It's a pleasure for us both to be part of that movement, which is kind of driving forward the kind of systemic change that you just talked about there.
Yeah, and I'm sort of borrowing the words of the Future Food Movement. I really, really believe that every job should be a climate job. I don't think anyone should do work that doesn't take into account the planet one way or another, because it's our responsibility. And the only way that we're going to manage to create change is through our labor. It's through us working towards making things better. It took 1 million actions to take us where we are. It'll take 1 million actions to take us out of it. And it's every single person's responsibility to just find this little thing that they can do within their own capacity, whatever it might be. We all have some agency and we all have some impact. We can all do something, no matter how big or small. It will make a difference cumulatively.
And how better to sum up a little bit radical, the purpose of this podcast, all of us doing something a little bit different to improve the world. So I want to spend a little bit of time on the second big area that you said you were working on, because I think that's very important as well. I think it's really interesting in your work how you split it into those two big projects for those two big areas. So having this kind of macro environmental impact, but also having more of a societal impact as well on another level. So food insecurity, talk to us about that. How big a problem is food insecurity in the UK, in the world?
Before telling you about food insecurity, I will frame the work that I'm doing a little bit, because Olio never intended to work on food insecurity. It was absolutely not part of what we set ourselves up to do. We wanted to reduce food waste because it's an environmental issue that's terrible. A solid 8 to 10% of all greenhouse gas emissions, according to the IPCC, are related to food waste. So it's a huge, huge area that really needs a lot of attention. And what we realized is that in the UK, 40% of this comes from the households. So we thought, okay, this is what we need to do. Like, the biggest bulk is us, so we need to help us reduce food waste. And this is how Olio came about, really. But in doing so, what we didn't realize was that it was going to become a lifeline for a lot of people. And it was going to become a way for a lot of people who actually need the food to access it. And the data that we realized, globally, there's 800 million people who are food insecure. That's 1 out of 9 of every single one of us. And in the UK, there's an estimated 8 million people who are food insecure, with I think 60% that are severely insecure, meaning that they don't know where their next meal is going to come from. But 8 million people in the UK, that's kind of close to the London population, which is huge. Imagine a London-wide population that's food insecure. That's insane to think of in a country that is, where access isn't an issue. I was in Kenya not too long ago, and there's a real scarcity, like the food is not there. That's why people can't eat it. In the UK, no, we're throwing away tons and tons of it. An average family throws away about £800 a year, of groceries. Meanwhile, you have lots of AIDS going on, 8 million people who are food insecure. It just makes no sense. So food insecurity has a tremendous prevalence. And while the data on the 8 million people is what we know about officially from a statistical perspective, there's unfortunately something that we've realized with Olio is that there's a huge amount of hidden hungry, which are people who fall between the nets. So people who just don't qualify for food bank support and who have full-time jobs, but maybe they're a single mom, maybe they have kids, maybe they work part-time. And because of this, they really, really struggle to put enough food on the table. And having Olio supports them in a way that they were not able to find support before. And also, because we're not about food insecurity, we also have a lot of users who come to us and tell us that they wouldn't have necessarily been inclined to ask for help or get help, but they feel great because Olio is about community and it's about the environment, and it's not about feeling stigmatized, feeling like you need. It's about taking part in a really joyful, lovely community, which is what we stand for exclusively. Food waste is really the key and the main focus for Olio, but food insecurity inevitably is something that we touch upon. And so in doing this, we've been doing a lot of work because we're not equipped to become something people depend on, because we don't have all the other support that vulnerable people need. And so when people are clearly needing a lot more help, we try to tell them to go towards the right charities and the right bodies who are equipped and whose work it is to really support vulnerable communities. But we do know that we see a lot and that we have a lot of data and we have a lot of behavior on the app that can be used to support communities that are not being supported right now. And so it wouldn't really make sense for us to not try to help the public sector, help charities do better. I mean, a lot of charities today put their food banks where there is a real estate opportunity. It's not because there is a community that needs it here. It's because there is a building that's available. And access is a huge problem with food. And a lot of people are food insecure because they live in food deserts. If charities were able to know where the communities are that need food the most, then it's quite likely that they would try to engineer their way towards finding space there with a rational explanation so that people who need to access food the most can. And so this project that I'm doing with guys in St. Thomas's and Damso is really not part of Olio's main strategy at all. It's a side thing, but I think it's something that really matters because it has the potential to improve the access to food for a lot of communities that are really struggling at the moment.
So much in what you've just said that is resonating very profoundly. I'd like to go in on one thing that you said in that answer around the fact that Olio is almost a kind of joyful experience. It's a community experience, it's a sharing experience. It's not a handout, if I could use that term. How much do you think that the way that we tackle these big problems in society needs to have solutions that are perhaps more aspirational and more joyful? I sometimes feel like we are a bit downtrodden with doom and gloom. It's important that we understand the data, it's important that we understand the reality, but are we not motivated more by a joyful and aspirational experience and behaviour than we are by a behaviour that that sees us going without something, giving up something?
I think that's a really important topic. And I think it's a topic that relates to the theme of climate anxiety and us being bombarded with very alarming, very serious data on the end of the world in 10 to 15 years and not seeing anything happen, and how insanely stressful this is of like, wait, so like the world is going to collapse and no one's doing anything about it? And it's like the level of anxiety, and I've spoken to young people about this, even in their schools, and it's so awful. I think it's something that is debilitating and that's stopping a lot of people from doing anything about it. And I find that really, really problematic, because while it's crucial that we're aware of what's going on, it's also crucial that we don't lose our agency in that journey, and that we still realize that, I mean, the planet's not going to disappear. A lot of things that we know on it will disappear, like a lot of animals are already gone. And a lot of populations are going to have to move. That is all accurate. But humans are going to be there, and it's on the humans to be creative, to move forward, and to try to find better solutions, to live better. I think that is really important for individuals to engage with things that bring them joy and that make a good impact on them and on other people's lives, and to not be debilitated in the panic and the powerlessness of those scary pieces of data. The way to build a good future is to enjoy it and to invest towards making it great. It's not being so stressed and so panicked and so worried. It's about being optimistic about the future, because there really is no other way.
There's a quote that I'm reminded of now, which is that if you want to save the world, you've got to throw a better party than those destroying it. And I think sign me up for that party, frankly.
Yes, that's an excellent one.
I think one final point on this, Olio is a completely community-focused experience. Could community, bringing people together in positive action, positive behavioural change, be one of the keys to unlocking this joy, this positive, this aspirational experience? Because you're not only doing something that is having a positive impact and reducing your negative impact on the world, but you are filling up your soul by connecting with other people. Is community one of the tools that we need to use to create this joyful, aspirational experience?
I think community is key in the sense that it's fundamental to being human, and it's fundamental to our roots as a species. I think we live in groups. We can work together. We can imagine together. We can build together. And I think that working together is where our strengths are. It's not working in isolation. Together, we can do so much more. So yes, bringing people together around values that are fundamental to preserving our ecosystem and our environment has to be pivotal, and it has to be part of the solution. I just can't imagine how it wouldn't be. In a world that's so interconnected, I don't think that one singular person is going to make the change. I think it's a lot of people together working, joining forces, not to undo, but to build better.
Of course, and I agree with you. And I think it feels like the logical antidote to the fact that a lot of the problems that we are now facing have been from a system that has prioritized individual consumption, I would say. As an individual, consume whatever you want, whenever you want. Now it's time to come together as a community and, like you say, build together, reduce what needs to be reduced together. But that will be a joyful and positive experience, you know.
I think it should be. I don't know how realistic it is to imagine a scenario where everyone voluntarily lives a less enjoyable life for whatever reason. I don't know that that's a viable scenario. And in the lack of innovation, in the light of the lack of innovation, I think that's where a lot of people go towards, of like, we just have to do less and like do things differently. But I'm a deep believer that innovation will allow us to keep doing things and maybe enjoy them even more, but just making things better.
Absolutely, I'm with you there. Sign me up for that. So we're going to move on to a little bit radical world now. I mean, I feel like we've talked about the world quite a lot already, but lifting you out of your day-to-day work, what change would you like to see in the world that's a little bit radical?
Well, I've touched upon it earlier in the conversation. The wildest, most exciting idea I have, it would be for everyone to feel like their work is a work that should contribute to the planet. I would love for every single individual to have that agency, which a lot of people don't, like fundamentally don't have any of this, / don't even have work. But I would love for humanity to be able and have the capacity within their environments to feel like part of the duty is to help the world. And that would require so much change and so many difference. I don't know how that could be a reality, but I think it would be a very beautiful one.
I agree. Yeah, I love that. I love that ambition. It's okay to push the a little bit part of the question as well. Most guests often do. So, Anne-Charlotte, we're coming to the end of our conversation now. Thank you so much for joining us, telling us all about Olio, about your work at Olio, about the fantastic impact that you're creating with so many people. We always ask the same question at the end of the podcast, which is that if there's someone listening who has an idea that's a little bit radical, maybe for their work, maybe for their personal life, and they're not quite sure how to get going, what would your advice be to that person?
My advice would be talk to people around you and have conversations. And the more you talk about it, the more you make it real. And if you don't have anyone in your immediate circles who would understand or who would kind of be able to give you any relevant help, reach out to people on LinkedIn. Just do it nicely and just pitch your idea. Say, hi, I'm thinking about this. It's really wild. I think you work in this. Can you be a sounding board, or can I have your opinion on it? If you do this enough times, some people will say yes. And some people will give you advice and will maybe help you make it happen somehow. So connect with your community, connect with networks that are relevant. That's my biggest piece of advice.
Anne-Charlotte, thank you for joining us, and thank you to everyone for listening.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. If you enjoyed it, please follow us on your podcast platform. If you'd like to appear on A Little Bit Radical or have an idea of someone we should speak to, please email podcast@standingongiants.com. or get in touch with me on LinkedIn. You can search Rob Fawkes or search Standing on Giants and you'll find me there. Thank you very much and speak to you next time.